Good morning. Now, Mr. McIntosh, we have Ms. Grant.
We do have Ms. Grant, my lord.
Please sit down, Ms. Grant. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, as you know, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McIntosh, who's sitting opposite. But first, I understand you're prepared to take the oath. Sitting where you are, could I ask you to raise your right hand and repeat these words after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grant. Now, we've allowed 2 days for your evidence. We will sit in the morning until taking a lunch break at 1, but we will also take a coffee break, usually about 11:30. But if you at any stage wish to take a break, feel free just to give me an indication and we can take a break. Now, the other thing I would say at this stage is that we have a space to fill. It's very important that we hear what you have to say. Now, the microphones are there to help that, but if I could ask you to speak maybe a little louder than you would in normal conversation, and maybe even a little bit slower. I'm taking notes, as are other people. Now, Ms. McIntosh.
Thank you, my lord. Ms. Grant, good morning. I wonder if you could start with your full name.
Jane Margaret Grant.
And you retired as Chief Executive at NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde in January of this year.
I did, yes.
And you produced a statement in response to our questionnaire. Are you willing to adopt that as part of your evidence?
I am, yes.
Thank you. Now, before we go any further, did you have access to your email inbox at the time you were preparing your statement?
Yes, I
Thank
did.
you. Now, first question deals with governance and reporting structures in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. It's a simple question. We'll pick up most of these as we go, but the one I wanted to understand first is, to whom are you accountable as Chief Executive at NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, or were you accountable?
I was accountable to the chair of the board and also to the DG of Health and Social Care.
And to what extent do you require to report matters to the board in order to acquire authority to do things?
That's set out in the standing orders, and I had a good relationship with the chair, so I would have an ongoing conversation with him about what he wished to, but it is set out in the board standing orders.
And does that include the scheme of delegation?
Yes, yes.
Now, what I wanted to do is to go back to your involvement, your time when you were Chief Operating Officer of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. When did you arrive in that post?
In the Chief Operating Officer post in 2009.
And when did you leave?
2013.
Can you help us when in 2013?
When I left?
Yeah.
Let's get this.
I think it's in your CV, which we can go to. It's on page 4 of the statement bundle. So you didn't give it. You went to Forth Valley in October of 13.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, my apologies.
Now, if we look at your statement and we go straight to page 31 of the statement bundle and question 16, we asked you a series of questions about the removal of the maximum temperature variant from the proposals in May, June 2009. And to be fair to you, you've said you had, in A, halfway down the page, you had no involvement or understanding in the removal of the maximum temperature variant. It's not an area where having technical expertise and would not have been involved in any such decisions. Now, we're still trying to find out how that decision was made. Yeah. It's been suggested that it might be related to temperatures in the Stop Hill and Victoria ambulatory care centres, if I've got the names correct, PFI centres. Were you aware of issues around high temperatures in those buildings in 2009?
No, I was not.
Were you aware of whether there was... Well, I'm not right for it. I'll come back to that question. So the next question is, if we look at your statement on page 31, not on page 31, page 32, we asked you about your involvement in the selection process. In the bottom of the page, you answered, I was not closely involved in the issue. And you then list 2 of the meetings you attended, the Acute Services Strategy Board as a member, and the Performance Review Group, which is a board standing committee, which you attended. Now, were you also a member of the executive board for the project?
For the new hospital?
Yes.
I think I was, yes.
Yes. And if we look at the term of reference of that, which is in bundle 34, document 21, page 152, so this is the term of reference of the New South Glasgow Hospitals and Laboratory Project Executive Board, and it appears as Appendix 2 to a paper for the Performance Review Group, which approved it. And we put that to you when we asked you question 17C, and we asked you various questions about what this group did. And your answer is on page 33 of the question is on page 33 of the statement bundle, but I want to look at your answer on page 34 of the statement bundle at the top. So if we go to page 33 first, the question we asked you, we set out various quotes from the document, and then the 4 lines at the end, did this not make the executive board responsible for ensuring that technical changes pre-contract, including the removal of the maximum temperature variance in June 2009 and the agreement of the agreed temperature derogation, were properly assessed on a technical basis? And if we go over the page, we have your answer. Terms of reference outline a requirement for issues to be duly considered by the appropriate personnel. As outlined above, any such issues would require to be fully assessed by the project team and their technical advisors before coming to a multidisciplinary program board who would pay due attention to the technical recommendations about the suitability of any course of action. Now, if we go back to bundle 34, page 152, what I wanted to do is find where it says that in the terms of reference. So this multidisciplinary program board of which you described, is this executive board?
I believe so, yes.
Right. Why do you see it as multidisciplinary?
Because there would have been, my recollection of this, I'm afraid, is not...
Let's go to the next page with the membership in front of you. It might help you with your answer. Sorry, carry on, please.
So if you look at the voting members there, you have the medical director, you have the directors of various services, you have a finance person, you have Alec McIntyre, who was the director of facilities with technical knowledge, you have Alan Seabour, who had technical knowledge. So there was a range of professionals on that group. So it wasn't just a case of myself or others doing that. It was a case of taking the advice. So if a technical matter came in, I really need to stress I don't have a good recollection of this because it was a long time ago. My expectation would be that if there were a technical issue, they would bring a paper which would describe what the issue was and make a recommendation to the...
And so you see this as a non-expert or non-technically expert decision-making body, effectively?
Yeah, certainly,
Yeah.
yes.
because the reason that we have asked you about this is because these two issues, the removal of the maximum temperature variant, whereby the maximum temperature of the building was reduced from 28 to 26 degrees, and the decision which we have called, but wasn't called at the time, the agreed ventilation derogation, where it was agreed to have not 6 air changes per hour in the general wards, but less. Knowing what you now know about the hospital and its problems, if we can use that, or its issues, shall we say, around ventilation, would you have expected these issues to be brought to this executive board for a decision?
I think it's quite hard to say that because some of them are quite, in hindsight, is perhaps, but I think there was a huge amount of discussion and issues going on within the project team, with the project director and with the contractors and so on. So I think it's a matter of materiality as to what would have come. I would have expected that if there were issues with substantial implications either to the service or to the environment or to the financial situation, that they would have come to our board for a discussion and an agreement.
I take it you won't have read the employer's requirements from the bid documentation?
No. I may have way back,
yes,
or at least parts of it, but that wouldn't have been something that I would do.
What I'm going to propose to you is that, to put to you, is what we found out. So within the very long document, 200 pages, there is a requirement that the new hospital follow a listed list of guidance documents.
Yes.
One of which is Scottish Hospital Technical Memorandum 0301 2009 draft. Now, it wasn't enforced at that point, but that's listed in the employer's requirements. I understand what you're saying about the importance of only reporting material things, otherwise you don't get any work done. But would building a hospital not in compliance with Scottish Government guidance not be something that decisions shouldn't be made just by the project team?
Yeah, I think that's what I said, that I would expect that anything of materiality, and some of those issues certainly are material, would have come for ratification or agreement or whatever. I don't recall them coming there for that.
No, I mean, I don't think they did. I mean, that's unless the minutes are inaccurate. Yeah. Ms. Byrne, I think, takes the view they weren't there. She can't remember the meetings, but she reads the minutes. I think we had evidence last week.
Could I just
sorry, do continue.
Yes. Sorry, my apologies, but no. I think it's important to recognise the number of decisions and discussions that would have been going on with the project team and the contractors, and there would have been a huge amount. I'm not downplaying at all for a single second the issues that you've described, but there would have been a huge amount of issues going on and a lot of dialogue on a lot of issues. So it is important just to put that in the context of the complexity of building a hospital of that magnitude, and with those national and regional services, as well as just a normal district general hospital. It wasn't that. It was quite a different thing. So I think it's just important to put it in the context of the size and challenge of the whole hospital building. Indeed,
I think if we were to go and look at the M&E clarification log, which resolves all these issues, by the time contract is, it's a huge document with, I don't know whether it's hundreds or thousands of rows, but it goes on a long time. So I understand that. We had some evidence last week from Mr. Stewart from Partnerships UK. Do you recollect dealing with him at all? Or?
I don't, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
So he, I think, has some expertise in project management and governance.
Yes.
And at the time, Partnerships UK was offered, at least according to Mr. Seabour, Mr. Calderwood in his statement, to help the health board with issues around this procurement exercise. He talked, when I asked him, about concepts of assurance, of having systems of checking of whether decisions were being properly made within a project. Are you aware of whether there were any such systems running in the project that you were peripherally involved in as Chief Operating Officer?
Back in 2009?
Back in 2009.
I couldn't answer that with any certainty. I assume there were systems. I had no reason to doubt that there weren't, and I don't have a recollection of thinking, gosh, the systems and processes are not in place for assurance. but I couldn't answer that.
Because one of the issues that arises, I need to take you through, is if you go back to page 152 on this list, the role and remit of this group, this multidisciplinary program board, as you call it, is described on this page. And there are 6, 7 paragraphs here. And you'll see that the 4th one is that the executive board will have delegated authority to conduct and conclude negotiations at project critical moments. There's nothing in the minutes to suggest it ever did that. And if it was done by the project team. Do you have any awareness of whether you were asked for your view as a member of this board on what terms should be in the contract, what should or shouldn't be accepted in terms of the contract, or any of that level of detail?
I really don't recall ever being asked that. And I probably don't have the expertise to know it either.
Well, that was Mr. Stewart's point. I mean, a board like your board has a large number of people who don't do contract procurement. And so it seems odd that you would give this board the power to conduct and conclude negotiations when, as you just said, it's not your area of expertise.
The wording might, in hindsight, have been better, one would assume, in the sense of, I would assume that the aspiration was that there would be discussions in that board about anything of significance, and then the project team would actually do the negotiation. I don't think a multidisciplinary board, executive board like that would undertake negotiations. I don't think.
If we look at the next one, the board will oversee the management of change control procedures in that any change which impacts upon the project must be authorised by this board before it can be implemented. In a sense, is that the sort of point you were making a few minutes ago about reports would come to this board if people wanted to make material changes?
That, I think, is the expectation. And if you look at some of the major changes, and there were a few, then that would be the expectation. But I understand there has been discussion about the change control process.
Yes, I mean, do you remember anything about the absence of a change control process from the time?
I really don't remember the precise details, no.
Ultimately, however, when you were chief executive, there was an investigation internally within the health board after Professor Steele arrived about why the contract was signed in the way it was signed. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, there was some undertaking of that, yes.
Yes. Was the board able to ever find any documents other than the M&E clarification log itself to describe why this change was accepted?
Are we talking about the ventilation as the
ventilation aspect? Yeah.
No, we tried to ascertain that, but it was difficult to do that in terms of the paperwork, and some of the people who were involved in that had left, and it was very difficult to understand exactly what the rationale was.
Could it be that had there been a proper change control process in compliance with this paragraph of the remit and terms of reference of the board, then it would have been much easier to find out the reason, because you would have had a report and you could go and find the report, and Professor Steele and his colleagues could read it and understand the reason. And the fact that he didn't find one, might that not entitle someone to infer that there was no change management process actually at the time?
I think it's difficult to try and go back and see if that had happened, this would have happened. I think that's quite difficult. But I think if there had been a clearer, I was going to say log, but I don't mean the log of the M&E log, but if there was a clearer process. However, I do think that the change control processes, there was some process, I just cannot recall exactly what it was, because if there were changes that required, for example, some additional cost, or they required some change to the clinical service, then they would have had to be understood quite clearly. I think some of the decisions and issues that you're describing were done prior to that, and so therefore it isn't easy to be straightforward and say if this had happened, that would have happened. But I do think it was disappointing that we couldn't understand quite easily where those decisions had been made, and more importantly, what the rationale was.
Well, let's, I think, look at the, well, I'll put something to you, and I wonder whether you want me to look at the documents. So we've been through the meetings of this board from its establishment in June through to its last meeting in February, and there is at no point a report to it about any changes. So not only is there no report about maximum temperature variation being removed in the summer, May, June, and there's no report to the final meeting saying we still have an outstanding issue over the ventilation of the general wards, what do you want me to do about it? That's not there. But there isn't anything else. There's a report of the evaluation process. There's discussion of the terms of the contract in financial terms. But there is never a report saying we need to move this ward, or we can't provide as many rooms, or any clinical change. That doesn't happen. And so what I'm putting to you is that all the members of that executive board, however long it was, to some extent bear a responsibility for the fact there are no records, because you were the board whose job it was to hold the project team to account. How do you respond to that? We can go to the minutes if it would help.
No, I think there are, in hindsight, I think it would have been better to be explicit about what those decisions were. No doubt that they were going, some of the issues that you've discussed were going on in good faith in the background. And when I've looked at one or two of the minutes, there were a lot of issues discussed at those meetings. And the clinical changes we were trying to keep to a minimum. And I know there have been some, and I'm sure we'll come on to that at some point during the, but because if as we progress with this project, if we had allowed significant changes to happen, all over the place, then loads going on, then it would have been very difficult to manage this project with the size and complexity of it. But I think it is fair to say that that it would have been better if we could see clearly where those decisions were made. I think that's fair.
Mr. Calderwood, I think it's in paragraph 199 of his statement, suggests that your responsibilities in respect to the project were more associated with the clinical input to the project than anything else.
My personal responsibilities.
Would that be a fair description of what your main input was to the project?
Yeah, at the time I was the chief operating officer, so from my recollection is that I had to make sure that if there were any substantial issues coming forward in terms of how services would operate, or if there were changes to the clinical service, then that was my responsibility too.
So, for example, we've looked at a series of clinical output specifications for haematology wards, adult, paediatric, and for general wards. To what extent would you have been involved in ensuring that clinicians had an input into those clinical output specifications? Or is that not what you mean by what you just said?
So there would have been. There was a process whereby clinicians were involved in having those discussions. If I go back to my time as the general manager and the director of a service before I was the chief operating officer, I recall that there were some instances where clinicians were being taken away from their day job to go and have those discussions. So there was definitely input from clinicians. And if there had been any difficulty in releasing them, there would have been conversations about how to do that and how to release people. But I would not have been involved in the detail of exactly what happens in that clinical output spec, because there was a lot.
And so are you the right person to direct this observation, which I think has been made by a number of people, including one of the architects, that these clinical observations are rather different? Some of them are much more structured, rigorous documents that cover everything, and some of them are somewhat lighter in areas of detail, and there's not a sort of standard quality across them. Would you have had any involvement into the quality assurance of that process?
No, absolutely not.
There's one particular issue that arises out of the employer's requirements, and it relates to isolation rooms. Now, are you aware that once the hospital was open, it became clear that all the isolation rooms in the hospital, almost all of them, were positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms?
No.
No, were you aware that some of them had to be changed over the following years, where some were converted to positive pressure rooms and some to negative pressure rooms?
I am aware that there was discussion about that, and that there had to be some changes, but I wasn't involved in the detail of that.
Well, the reason I ask you is because we have worked back to the employer's requirements. And I know you haven't seen this, but it just gives us context. So if we go to Bundle 46, Volume 3, Document 1, page 5, with a bit of luck, that should be the front page of the employer's requirements. There we are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to page 177, which is a section, yes, ventilation of isolation rooms. Now, this is quite technical. Now, either I understand that the important point to draw from this is 8.2.14.6 and point 7, which list various guidance documents that should apply to isolation rooms. And you see at 8.2.14.7 at C, SHPN 4 is listed.
Yes, I see
Now,
that.
we are told that the consequence of this section is that the bid documents from Brookfield Europe specified that all the isolation rooms would be positive pressure ventilated lobby rooms, which of course are only suitable in certain circumstances. And I'm just wondering if the health board ever worked out why its own employer's requirements required all the isolation rooms to be compliant with SHPN 4 as part of your investigations that you ultimately carried out.
I can't answer that. I don't
Okay.
know the answer to that. I don't know why that was there, and I wasn't involved in that level of discussion. And I really don't have the technical expertise either to make an informed judgment on that. And the other thing, I think, just to put it in context, the Chief Operating Officer's job, despite the fact it's not as big as the Chief Executive's job, is pretty big.
I appreciate that.
A massive amount of hospitals to deal with, a huge amount of issues, and 25,000 staff or something like that.
So,
So it's a huge job.
how, as a chief operating officer, involved, if you can take that off the screen, in the procurement of one hospital, which is huge, in a huge job,
Yes.
how do you make sure that people who are working for you are checking particularly safety aspects, but also clinical aspects of new procurement are right? What's the process that you want to ensure has happened?
So there was a regular dialogue with the directors of the services, and we did have discussion about, if there was things where clinical teams weren't happy or whatever. And in a hospital build that size, there would be, because people wanted, for example, bigger space, or they wanted more rooms or whatever, and there was discussion about that. I do vaguely remember some of those.
But was there a process of internal checking so that, I appreciate a clinical team might say we want A, and the board's technical consultants might write that down in the form of the employer's requirements. Was there anybody back checking that it actually made sense in accordance with higher level guidance, the board's wider policies?
So there would have been discussions with the clinical teams, and with, for the purposes of this, I would say the general manager, but I don't remember exactly who it was, but who's a senior player as well, and also members of the project team. And they were the ones that really held the ring on making sure that if Jane said, I wish this is essential, then this is what we need to have. So rather than, there would have been a dialogue with the general managers and the local teams, but they've got another alternative job, their day.
Well, that's the thing, because not only do you, as Chief Operating Officer, but all the managers who report to you
Yes.
have a day job.
Yes,
You're also not technically qualified.
correct.
And the clinicians who are treating the patients, they've sort of got a day job too.
Absolutely.
And we've heard evidence there are certain, if we just pick ventilation as the topic we're interested in, but as you rightly say, there were lots of other issues in the hospital, we know there are some clinicians back then who knew their stuff on this. We know that Professor Hood, was Dr. Hood then, had an interest in ventilation. We know that Dr. Jones, as he was then, had an interest in ventilation. We know that Dr. Redding had some interest, and we know that Ms. Rankin at ICN had interest. And so one can envisage an ad hoc process. But what system was in place to ensure that when the health board specified the hospital it wanted, it was thinking about things as high level as following Scottish government guidance and not making inadvertent mistakes along the way?
I'm afraid I can't answer that. I think it will. I would assume it was the project team who were involved in that, but it certainly wasn't my team.
Okay. What I want to do now is to move on to almost the end of your time as Chief Operating Officer and the decision to move the adult BMT unit into Ward 4B.
Yes.
Now, I don't think we asked you about this in your questionnaire, so I think we should take the opportunity of picking it up now. Can you recollect what involvement you had in that?
I vaguely remember that there was a paper taken to, I think it was the Quality and Performance Committee, I think it was called then, to seek authority to make that change.
Because we have an email, which admittedly is Pamela Andes, not you, but Bundle 14.
Could you say that again? Sorry.
Pamela Andes has written an email, I think. It's Bundle 14, Volume 1, Document 2, page 45. No, it's Fiona McCluskey, sorry. Fiona McCluskey, who was the nurse advisor on the project in 2014, reporting about various changes and who signed them off. And the second paragraph is the transfer of the VMT was approved by Jane Grant in late 2013, and the ward design was amended to incorporate this change. To be fair, Dr. Armstrong is very keen, I think, to point out that it was her paper that went to the committee.
Yeah, I think she and I sponsored the
Yes.
paper.
And so the question really becomes is, I appreciate that deciding to move a service like this into a new hospital is a difficult and complex decision with lots of different factors. And I think Dr. Armstrong spoke very clearly about the need to ensure that the service was near a high dependency critical care unit.
Yes.
But when you've decided to move something, and you and she are the sort of sponsoring minds, what steps did you take to ensure that what came, what was built, was what was needed?
Well, I think that paper came just as I was going out the door to Forth Valley. But even if I had been there, I think that email's, I didn't have the authority to approve it myself.
No.
I had 800 and, I can't,
£800,000.
yes. So from that perspective, that it might be a kind of loose language a little bit in that email. There was a process and it was approved. But at that point, it would have been handed over to the project team and they would have been involved with the clinical team about what was required.
And so we've had evidence from Mr. Jenkins,
yep,
explaining how it's his recollection that he went to visit the project team and told them exactly what they had at the beats and how they wanted it.
Yes.
Would you have any awareness of that process taking place?
No.
No.
Well, I wasn't there then. I wasn't that. But even if I had been there, I don't think I would have had a knowledge of the process.
But just to return to the question I asked you again, was there a system that you can describe of effectively ensuring that when you make a decision as a board or a board subcommittee to move a new ward, move a new service into a hospital, that someone is making sure that what is provided to the clinicians is exactly what they need before they walk in the door? Was there a system to do that?
I assume there was, but it would have been through the project team, because neither general managers or colleagues like that or the clinicians, it's not their job to establish that the technical aspects of this have been adhered to.
Who would have been advising the board on the technical aspects of the new BMT ward at the time this decision was made?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well,
Sorry.
I mean, we've had evidence about this, but what's your awareness of whether the board had a technical team, including an M&E engineer, healthcare planners, and that sort of thing, advising it in 2013 on the new project? Did it have a team?
I assume so. I can't remember, I'm afraid. It would have been part of the project team's remit.
What I'll do now is to move on to your return from Forth Valley. Sorry, do down the people of Forth Valley. You've answered quite a lot, and it's the earliest questions. But I think probably what I want to do is to go to put to you and discuss in slightly more detail the way Mr. Calderwood described No, I won't do that at this stage. I'll do that later. What I want to understand is how your role relates to various other people, because we've obviously, as an inquiry, been hearing from different people over a long period of time, and it's important, I think, to understand the working relationships and who has authority over whom and that sort of thing. You explained at the beginning of your evidence that you are accountable to the chair.
Yes.
You're not accountable to the board then?
No, to the board through the chair.
Through the chair. And how does your working relationship, as it were, authority, relate to that of the medical director? Do you have any authority over her, or is it sort of equal relationship? How's the authority divided between the two of you, as it were?
Medical director reported to me.
Medical director reported to you, right. And the director of finance reported to you as well?
Yes.
And the director of public health?
Big pardon?
Director of public health?
Yes.
So even though some of these people are executive members of the board, they also report to you?
Yes.
Right. And if we go to page 5 of your statement, I asked you a series of questions which I don't want to go through in full detail because you've given a very long answer about how things are reported to the board. And I want to check my understanding because I think it's important that I do this at this stage. There are a series of board subcommittees. Each has its authority and area of responsibility. That's effectively the core structure of the board. So the main board and then subcommittees. Am I right in that?
Yes, and they have terms of reference.
And so they will consider at a subcommittee level a particular series of standard reports and exceptional reports. And those reports will be put into their minute. The minute sessions will be recorded in their minutes.
Yes.
And those minutes go to the board.
Yes.
If a paper is sent to, say, Clinical Care and Governance Committee, I've got that title right.
Right.
Does the paper go with the minutes to the board? So the board members get the full set of papers for the subcommittees? Or do they just get the minutes?
I think they just get the minutes, but any board member can ask for papers if they wish.
I do appreciate they can ask, but the issue I'm trying to get my handle on is who's telling the board as we go through the next 2 days. So if we think about the period you've arrived as chief executive, and we know, with the benefit of hindsight, that there are going to be issues around ventilation and water systems over between 17 and into 19. And we know they're going to come on, we're going to talk about them in a moment. What subcommittees of the board would be the natural places to report emergencies of issues around the ventilation system in the hospital? Is there a way this divides up?
So the terms of reference describe, and I'm sure you have them somewhere, what issues would go where. So the Finance Planning and Performance Committee was the main committee that looked at the estates and facilities issues. Clinical Care Governance Committee would have looked at any clinical issues, and the Audit and Risk Committee would obviously look at audit and risk and some of those.
So if we
the Acute Services Committee as well also dealt with all things acute, or a number of things acute.
Well, that's the thing that I've been a little confused by, and I want you to help me, is that I do understand the division between financial committee, the clinical care committee, and the audit committee. That makes sense to me. Comfortable with that. How does the acute services committee fit into that? Because at one level, it overlaps with the clinical care and governance committee.
Yeah, so the acute services committee, my understanding was it was established because at the time of the integration boards being established, so there's 6 HSCPs and 6 IJBs within Glasgow and Clyde.
Yes, that's integrated joint boards.
Yes, yes. And at that time, it was felt that the acute services, which was a huge part of the board, needed to have some kind of forum to discuss some of the kind of issues that in essence would have gone to the IJBs, and the acute services committee agreed a programme with the chair and the vice chair of the committees around, things like theatre utilisation, or and for example, there was other things around performance, and they looked at things like their cancer performance and this kind of stuff, and the chair and vice chair of those committees, along with the executive lead for the committee, would agree what was going, as well as what's in the terms of reference or in the scheme of delegation.
So, in the question, if we look at ventilation issues as they arise after you arrive, they might go to financial performance because that has state's functionality. If there's money to be spent or fitting out the building, that might go there.
Yes.
Yeah. They might go to clinical care and governance committee because they relate to the clinical services being provided in those parts of the hospital.
I think only if there had been some impact on patients and so on, and I'm not saying there wasn't, I'm just saying that I think it would have been a different intonation to the clinical care governance committee.
And so it's more, they might have gone to acute services, it affects the running of a service.
Generally, but it's difficult to be entirely specific because it does require a conversation quite often about where they would go, how best they would go, and the head of, or the director of governance and corporate services for the board, along with the executive lead and the chair and the vice chair of the committees would be clear about where it was going.
So there's a process that happens involving the director of corporate governance, the chairs of the committees, the executive leads, potentially you as well, steering the paper to the right committee.
Yes. Not all. It's not as.
No, it doesn't always need to happen, but if there's a debate, then there's a process. Yeah. Now, you did that thing which I now say, this person doing a transcript. If you meant to sort of mouth yes, then you probably need to say it.
So yes, that is my understanding. My apologies.
You.
Sorry.
And with the same
to do it the right tone and the right volume and the right speed. So
it is a
my
problem.
Apologies.
Yes.
I will not do that.
That's particularly helpful.
It's not easy to give evidence. I appreciate that.
So if we stay with the topic of committees, how does the board infection control committee work? Does that feed into clinical care and governance?
Yes.
Right. So the next thing is to think about water. I presume the same sort of debate about where things go is happening for water-related issues as they arise in the hospital.
Yes, I think the water, though, because when the water became an issue, it was generally through the IMT, and that's when it all started in that beginning of 2018.
And that's why it feeds into clinical care and governance, because IMT is feeding into clinical care. Right.
Yes.
So a handy thing to remember is that IMT issues go up to clinical care and governance, they don't go to acute, generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, there might have been some discussion at the Acute Services Committee as well about the overarching kind of process, but it would have been mainly the Clinical Care Governance Committee.
And where does the water safety group feed into? Is that into facilities, finance programme and facilities?
Yes.
Right. Now, we've also heard about board seminars.
Yes.
So what's their status?
So the board seminars were agreed with the chair and the director of corporate services and governance, and the board members were asked if they had things they wanted to particularly hear more about from their engagement through the board or through subcommittees or things that had occurred. They were able to ask for things to be added. The executives thought perhaps there would been a report issued or something, and they thought that the board should be briefed on that. And ultimately the chair decided which issues would come to the board seminar. And board seminars were generally, at that time, and I think they might have changed now, but were generally, there would be 2 or 3 items on the board seminar. And generally at the beginning of the board seminar as well, the chair would ask me to brief the board members on anything of if there was something of pertinence.
Yeah, so we see that in board agendas. There's a chief executive's report at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, and the board seminar was similar.
As well, right? But can the board seminars make a decision?
Beg your pardon?
Can the board seminar make a decision?
Not generally, no.
When could they make a decision?
There was a discussion to inform the decision, so they didn't, because they weren't minuted, so there wasn't a...
Exactly. So if the decision it comes in one of the subcommittees or in the board itself.
Yes.
So if, for example, you received a Scottish Government report on something, you might have a seminar to inform the board and then make a decision at a later meeting.
Yes, and some stuff would have just gone to the corporate management team as well. So bearing in mind the corporate management team is the executive arm of the board decision-making process.
And the corporate management team decisions are all minuted?
Yes.
So there won't be an occasion when... So what's the materiality test for whether you take something to the corporate management team? Because obviously not everything goes to the corporate management team, you never get any work done. So when do you decide to take things to CMT? Does it have a formal agenda and papers?
Yes.
And so that something has to be decided whether to put it on the agenda.
Yes, generally what happened was people, there is a terms of reference and there is a description of what should go to the corporate management team, but people generally asked for things to go to the corporate management team. Then the director of corporate governance, I've got the title wrong, but corporate services and governance would pull together, or her team would pull together a list of those things. Sometimes she would say, no, I don't think it's appropriate, because she was very experienced in what should go. And then a draft agenda would be pulled together for the corporate management team. And then at that time, there was some discussion, because as you say, there was quite a lot of things on it sometimes. And some of them we didn't take to the corporate management team because there was too much and because they weren't of the right level.
So there's another group or committee I wanted to understand, this concept of what you called it later on a gold command group.
Yes.
Now you deal with that actually at question 83, which is page 88. And you've given an answer what it is. What I wanted to understand, not so much is what it is, but how did it exist before the Oversight Board was created, or was it a novelty at that point?
No, I think it was, my recollection, it was established after the Oversight Board report, because it was a more localised, and there was a silver command underneath that, it was a more localised kind of group to make sure that that the issues in the Oversight Board were being progressed.
So it was a doing group arising from the Oversight Board report?
Generally, but it wasn't exclusively that, because we thought that it would be an opportunity, and the local team wanted an opportunity as well to talk about some things that weren't part of the Oversight Board report, like things like patient experience and the complaints, for example, how many complaints there had been and whether there were emerging themes from that and whether that should link into some of the processes we had or some of the performance issues. Or indeed, okay, I think there was some discussion about finance and so on as well. So it was a wider group. A big part of it was the Oversight Board. But
it's a Queen Elizabeth University Hospital only group and it's post-Oversight Board?
I didn't hear.
It's a Queen Elizabeth Hospital only group, yes, and it's post-Oversight Board?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so there's nothing like it before the Oversight Board arrives?
No, I don't know. But the size of it's really quite important to understand the size of the sectors within Glasgow and Clyde. Some of them are as big as health boards.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Before I moved on to more specific, I thought we should just explore that. We've heard a lot about South Sector, North Sector, Regional, Clyde. Yes. Now, it doesn't matter whether you want to count this in terms of headcount or budget or any measure you think of as appropriate, but can you explain to us the scale differences between the various parts of GGC in, say, 2017, just to give us a feel of size?
So I couldn't give you the numbers,
No, I
I can't
appreciate
remember that. But the south sector, for example, has the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in it, has Gartnavel General Hospital in it, it has the Victoria's Ambulatory Care Centre in it. So it has more than just the Queen Elizabeth, and it is the size, and forgive me, but I'm familiar with it more, that it is the same size, in fact, maybe slightly bigger than the whole of Forth Valley Health Board.
Right.
So the north sector equally has it has Lightburn Hospital, it has the Glasgow Royal Infirmary in it, and it has Straub Hills Ambulatory Care Hospital, so slightly smaller as well. Then you have the Diagnostics Directorate, which covers, there's a kind of matrix kind of organisation. So the sectors, I should probably do this first, the geographical sectors, which is the north, the south, and Argyll and Clyde. And Clyde has the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley, and it has Inverclyde Royal, and it has the Vale of Leven Hospital in it. So those are the geographical sectors.
And Clyde was its own health board until it got merged in.
It was until, I think, 2006 or something.
Right.
I forget the exact date, so, but it was quite a long time ago. And then there is the Diagnostics Directorate, Women and Children's and Regional Services.
And they provide services within the other hospitals, but they are sort of a specialist within those services.
Yes.
And in terms of scale, women and children or regional services or diagnostics, are they comparable in size in terms of budget and staff to the geographical sectors, or much smaller?
So the three geographical sectors are all roughly the same. No, they're not actually. The Queen Elizabeth is biggest, but diagnostics, I think, would be smaller. Regional services would be at the same size because it had a lot of services in it, like it had the Institute of Neurological Sciences.
So it's quite a big sector.
Oh yes, it is. Yes.
So if we see the 6 sectors you've named,
yes,
some are bigger than the others, but they're all large organisations within the health board. There's no one that's exceptionally small, is what I'm trying to get across.
Absolutely not.
Not right. Okay.
They're all large, and some of them, as I say, are as big as other health boards. And
now, we take that off the screen for a moment. I want to understand how your role as chief executive of the health board relates to the person who holds the job title as chief executive of the Scottish NHS. What's the relationship there? The DG in health and social care.
So she has a discussion with the chief execs and so on, but there wasn't a reporting mechanism where every day or every week or any of that stuff. So
she doesn't actually have a sort of line management control over you?
Not generally, but she does. There are regular meetings with the board chief executives where the board chief execs and she and some of her executive team discuss issues, and we're asked to do various things.
But the relationship between, say, you and the medical director and the director of public health is a rather more line managerial relationship than between the DG health and social care and you.
Yes.
Yes, right. These meetings with the DG's health and social care, were these monthly, broadly?
Yes, they were monthly, yes.
Now, if we think back to the period when you arrived, later on, I understand you gave an interview to the BBC in which you indicated that you inherited a number of issues from the previous administration, if I have the words right. Do you recollect that?
Vaguely, yes, yes.
Did you inherit any issues from the previous administration?
Well, I think I had clearly been in Glasgow before when I came back from Forth Valley, so I knew the complexity of the organisation. I knew there were huge issues, a large number of them. And some of the issues that I had been dealing with before I went away related to the old estate in the south sector. The Southern General had been there for a long time. I don't know how long, but a long time. And I really hadn't anticipated that the amount of issues would come with the Queen Elizabeth. It was a brand new hospital. It was state of the art, and therefore I had thought that there would be less issues emerging from the new hospital than there had been from the old real estate, which really was very old. Between that and the Western and the old Victorian Infirmary, there was a huge amount of issues about
So you were expecting issues from the old hospitals. You weren't expecting it from the Queen Elizabeth, in essence.
I wasn't expecting the same amount. I was expecting a lot less.
A lot less. Did you have any sort of handover briefing or handover note from Mr. Calderwood when you arrived and he left?
So I think I've said in my statement that there wasn't much time between me being appointed and him going. I've forgotten exactly how long it was, but it wasn't very much time. And then as part of that, I did meet with him, I think twice, but it's not exactly clear in my mind. I can't remember exactly how long it was. And we discussed a number of issues at those meetings.
Did he tell you anything at those meetings about any concerns about the building of the Queen Elizabeth?
I don't recall him telling me any issues at that time.
Because we're going to discuss the rest of the morning, I think, how you learn about issues in Ward 4B and Ward 2A and the general wards and possibly PICU and possibly isolation rooms. We'll get to all of that. And what I want to understand is you arrive in April, I think.
Yes.
When's the first time that you realise that there are issues around the ventilation system of this building? In the broadest sense, because obviously we know you arrive in April. When do you first think, oh, that's not what I expected, or that's interesting, or that's concerning?
Yeah, so I've tried hard to remember this because I've been asked it several times in this. And in 2017, there wasn't a huge amount of discussion about the ventilation at my level. As part of the process that Jennifer led with the medical director led with the whistleblowers, or those who are now perceived as whistleblowers, but at that point, and we'll come to that, I'm sure, about whether it was or not, but that discussion which had that meeting at the beginning of October, ventilation was raised there. And at that point, so I must have known about some of it by then.
Well, indeed, that's what that I think is what I need to sort of try and drill down to, because let's sort of do it methodically and see where we get to. So you arrive in April, you have some handovers from 2 meetings with Mr. Calderwood. As far as you can recollect, he doesn't tell you any of this stuff. Is that broadly right?
Certainly not in the detail. I don't remember him mentioning it at all, but it's not impossible he did, but I don't remember that.
Now, we know that in March 2017, a paper is prepared about Ward 4B ventilation options paper for Acute Services Committee.
Yes.
And we know from Dr. Armstrong's evidence, and I think recollection Mr. Jenkins' evidence, that she pulls back the paper for some changes to be made. And it goes to a later meeting of that committee. When did you first become aware that money needed to be spent somehow on one of a number of options to do with adult BMT?
I think by the time I came back, it had been agreed.
You think it had been agreed?
I think so, yes. And I was aware of some of the issues at that point. I was.
So were you aware of the different options, the different locations it could be placed? Back at one point on a roof in a car park site, on a new site of the building in the back in Ward 4B, they discussed various choices. Yeah.
I think there would have been some discussion with me, but I don't have a clear recollection of on the 24th of June, I was told this, that and the other. But I'm reasonably certain that there would have been some discussion with me about that. But it had already been agreed, is my understanding it.
Right. Because the paper we have, Bundle 27, Volume 7, Document 6, page 158. So Bundle 27, Volume 7, Document 6, page 158. Uh, 27, not 47. So this is a draft report from targeted to go to March 2017 Acute Service Committee. And this is the one that, when I showed it to Dr. Armstrong, her evidence was this is the version that she asked to be redrafted for reasons that I'm not going to, I think, go into with you. So that's before you arrive. And so you think it might have been decided before then? Before you actually arrived?
I certainly don't recall being involved in a discussion about what the options were. I don't recall that.
Would it be normal, given the scale of the job, for something like this, with a relatively significant capital cost and a national service, to not come even informally to you as chief executive?
There's a sort of double negative in there.
Yeah, there is a bit.
Yeah.
I recognise that
question-
your life is big and complicated. You've got lots of things to do. So I'm putting that out as a sort of statement.
Yeah,
I understand that. So taking that on board, that you have a large job covering a large amount of services.
Yes.
But equally observing there seems to be quite an important service.
Yes.
Would it be normal for? Would you expect to be briefed on it if it was a live decision to be made?
Yes, there would have been discussion about it.
Right.
I'm sure there would have been.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say, we've got the copy rate coming up soon. I'm going to ask my colleagues in the back room to go through bundle 36 and find the decision point. So we'll come back to that after the coffee break.
Okay.
Let's think now about Ward 2A. So we can take that off the screen. So this is obviously Shahalian. And when do you think you first became aware that parts of the Shahalian unit were sitting at 3 air changes now and no HEPA filtration? When there were views, including I think held by its own consultants, that it required more significant ventilation.
Yeah. Again, I think it was part of the, perhaps not in the detail you're describing, but in terms of the generality of there being issues there, I think it was in that later autumn of 2017.
Around the time of the SBAR.
I think so. I'm not 100% certain, but I think so.
Because we know, because we have it, there was an SBAR in January 2018 by HPS, and I'll just put that on the screen. So that's bundle 3, document 8, page 62. So we know that's dated a date in January of 2018. And I wondered, again, given the importance of the Shahalian unit as a national service, would you expect to be informed if Health Protection Scotland were getting involved in advising on its ventilation systems in the 2020?
I think there was some discussion about that, yeah.
Right.
But it's very difficult, and I'm really not trying to be evasive in the slightest, but it's very difficult to remember exactly when I knew what, and I'm sorry.
No, so I'm getting from your evidence so far that you can be relatively certain that you weren't told about it in a handover process.
Absolutely.
And on the other hand, you're not quite sure when you get told it between April, but by the time you get to September, October, and we'll come to that period in a moment, that's when you think you would definitely have known by then. Have I got that roughly right?
I would have known there were some general issues. Whether I knew exactly that the number of rooms and so on, I'm not certain of that. But I would certainly have known that there were emerging issues. And I think the other thing is, sometimes when those questions come, some of these things were emerging rather than on the 10th of June, somebody came to my room and said, there are 20 things really bad here. Generally, some of those things were emerging over a period rather than...
I appreciate that, but I mean, we'll come to one to do that, but Ward 4B had happened, if we take it off the screen, in July of 2015. So it had emerged well before you arrived.
Yes.
And Ward 2A had got on everyone's agenda at the same point in 2015. So to that extent, neither of those emerged. And so that's why I'm asking you when you were told about it, and we'll explore the autumn in a moment. I asked you earlier about the issue around isolation rooms, whether they're the right sort. Now, you said you had some awareness of changes around isolation rooms. Might that have been in 2017 or was that later?
I think it was part of the discussion around that autumn in 2017.
Right, okay.
But I wouldn't have been involved in. I mean, I don't know enough about positive pressure rooms and so on. I would have been involved in the clinicians are not happy with that.
So who should? I mean, I when I arrived at this inquiry, Ms. Grant, I didn't know the difference between positive pressure, negative pressure, positive pressure, ventilated lobby, and I think I was getting it wrong for about the first 6 months because it's not easy. I understand that.
Yep.
But who in the organisation should know the difference? At what level? What function?
So the infection control teams, the local teams, and the clinical team would look at what was required for individual.
So they should know what they need.
Yes.
Anyone else? Should the states know?
Yes. Yes.
Should the project team have known?
Yes.
You sure about that?
That they should.
They should know the difference and when they're needed in certain cases.
Well, they would be in dialogue with the clinical teams. Yeah, I mean, so it's not a case of in isolation, Jane sitting saying, "Well, I think we need this." There would be a dialogue because quite often clinical teams very often, and not in this case, I'm not suggesting that, but they want X, Y, and Z, and sometimes that's possible and sometimes it isn't. Clearly, if there's a patient safety issue which is pertinent, then it needs to be addressed. But if you go back to the things like space and so on, clinical teams will say they need 10 rooms or whatever.
Yes.
I make it up, but and perhaps that isn't possible. They can only get 8 rooms. I'm completely making this up, but over my career of 40 odd years, there's been a lot of dialogue about those kind of things. So there then has to be a discussion about what is absolutely critical and essential for patient safety and why that is, and what the parameters of that need to be. But that has to be in absolute discussion with the clinical teams because they would know what it is they need. But it's not a case of one person. It's a.
So if, for example, a clinical team or the infection control team or members of those say we need X rooms to have X, Y ventilation for Z reason, you would expect there to be a dialogue between them and the states and the appropriate managers.
Yes.
Right.
Because, for example, if I could take that a little bit further,
Of course.
then if you being a clinician say I need 8 rooms, right, then the managers would work with them to say, well, how many patients do we have? What is the length of stay of those patients? What are the conditions of those patients that require that environment? And therefore, is that 8 rooms the right number, or is it more or less? Are there subsets of those patients who require something, or is it as simple as saying, well, 8 equals 8, if you know what I mean? So there would be dialogue. It's not it's not a single. There's not a single person sitting in a room saying, well, I think I need this, so therefore
No, I appreciate that.
It would be an ongoing dialogue. That multidisciplinary process really is part of how we work on a lot of things.
Yes, and so we'll come back to that as we go, I'm sure, but just thinking about if it's a multidisciplinary process, to what extent do you as the chief executive and indeed the people who report to you have a responsibility to ensure that those disciplines are there, that they exist? So, for example, that you have estates people who are literate in this field of ventilation or in water, or that conversations take place. What responsibility do you have to make sure that those multidisciplinary meetings take place?
So that would be through the sector director or the director of estates. So they, that's common practice. So it's, that would be how it would work. So I wouldn't sit and say, well, because it would be completely impossible to do that with the volume of, as we sit today, there's probably a lot of discussions going on, but across all the hospitals about things like that. So it would be the local teams who would deal with that.
How do you create the culture in an organisation to foster such multidisciplinary discussions? Because we, for example, this is just an example, we had evidence from a number of people in the project team about how they dealt with the consultants in the Shahalian during the build process who wanted their offices to be in the ward, effectively.
Yeah.
And you might think, listening back to the evidence, that it wasn't really a multidisciplinary team, it was an expectation management process. And I'm just wondering, how do you create a culture in an organization where the not unreasonable response of managers saying, well, I haven't got the room, I haven't got the money, I haven't got the resource, doesn't just brush aside clinical concerns that are actually quite important?
Yeah, but each sector has a director, but they also have an associate medical, a chief of medicine, and they have a chief nurse as well, who, as well as other colleagues and general managers, but they also have, in essence, that triumvirate organisation, that process is replicated through the acute division. So there's the board, i.e. the chief exec and her team. Then there's the acute team, which has also got, so the chief operating officer has an acute medical director and acute nursing director. And then the sectors also have a chief nurse and a chief of medicine as well. So those clinical people are tasked with making sure that those processes are, so it's not just a case of Jane, the general manager, sitting in isolation. They have clinical advice, and the general managers and the chief exec, for example, work very closely with their medical and nurse director, as with the finance director and HR and so on as well. But that when I was a general manager way back a long time ago, the nurse and the doc and the general manager worked really closely together.
What happens if they don't work closely, or if the general manager rather rules the roost and decides just to make decisions him or herself? Does that not cause problems that voices aren't heard?
It could, but equally it could be that the chief of medicine, so those people are professional, serious, senior people. So it's generally not a case of, because each sector also has a management team. So, and they have meetings that are minuted and so on. So it's not impossible that would happen, but it's also unlikely that you wouldn't ignore your clinical advice if there was a safety issue.
Right.
Well, I would anyway.
Now, what I should probably do is to look at something that arrived before you were in post.
Okay.
And so this is Mr. Louden's email of the 21st of June, 2016. It's at bundle 12, document 105, at page 816. And this is an email sent by Mr. Louden reacting to who had been project director, and he was your director of facilities and capital planning. So did he answer direct to you, Mr. Louden, at this point?
So he had when he came, he was the project director.
Yes.
And then he, and there was a director of estates and facilities. And when it moved into the full new hospital, then he became the director of estates and
So
facilities.
he's answering directly to you? Not at this point, because you're not there,
yes.
but in his role as director of facilities and capital planning, he answers to the chief executive?
Yes.
Yes. So this is before you arrive.
Could I just read it for us?
Do, please.
Sorry. Thank you.
And this is basically an email to the project team from him, asking some questions. Now, the reason he's asking the questions is an earlier email from Mr. Parry on the 26th of May, 2016, which is bundle 20, document 68, page 1495.
Sorry, I'm not finished reading that.
No, I'll give you a chance to read them again. I just want to set it up, because what I'm going to do is we're about to have a coffee break. And so I'm going to ask my colleagues in witness support to show you these three emails again.
Yeah,
so I'm reading them out really for their benefit in the back room. So document 20, but bundle 20, document 68, page 1495. So this is an email from Mr. Parry to Dr. Inkster and Mr. Louden, Anne Harkness, and Mr. Walsh.
Okay.
And it explains why single rooms with ensuite are supplied with air at a rate of 40 litres per second, equivalent to 3.19 air changes per hour, and an extract arrived ensuite at 45 litres per second. And this is a move away from the requirements of SHTMO 301 for 6 air changes. Now, I'll let you read that. So this is in May 16. And then I'll go back to the next email when you tell me to.
Okay.
Happy?
Yeah.
Going back to the one I looked at before. So that's bundle 12, document 105 at page 816. So this is an email. Now, you'll see it says, Dear all, I've attached a copy of an S-bar. So this is an S-bar, single page S-bar by Dr. Inkster, and this is in June 16. And it's fourth line. Robert Calderwood has instructed me to establish why there was agreed variation to the recommended air changes for a single room of a ward that are 6 air changes an hour as per HTMO 301, and from government's perspective, the process sign off of specification as delivered. And then there's a discussion about when it was supposed to have happened. Do you see the reference to the competitive dialogue in the second paragraph?
Yes.
Now, it's fair to say that Douglas Ross is a Curry and Brown consultant, and he's asked to contact David Hall. Alan is Seabour, Peter is Moyer. Heather Griffin was the manager for the children's hospital, the adult hospital, and Shiona Frew provided administrative support.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Let's go to the last document in the sequence. This is Mr. Seabourne's email, 23rd of June 2016, bundle 12, document 104 at page 813. Now, this is quite long, and this is why I'm showing it to you now. If we just jump to the next page, you'll see the penultimate paragraph of the text begins, we are where we planned to be, and that's what I've been calling this email. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just to take a moment, because I appreciate your document list was very long, to read these 3 documents. This is bundle 12, document 104 at page 813, because what I want to do is explore with you when you were told about this general ward ventilation issue in 2017. And I appreciate that Mr. Seabourne gives an explanation for what happened. And I wonder whether, Lord, this might be a convenient point to break for a coffee break, because it is a long email, and I do feel that Ms. Grant should have a chance to read it properly.
We can do that. I would plan to take a coffee break of 20 minutes, but please have as much time to read these 3 emails, which, if I follow Mr. Mankosh, you'll be provided with it on paper. And I hope you're also provided with a cup of coffee.
Thank you.
Right. If we'll take a coffee break now and try and sit at about 20 to 12. Smankerton.
Thank you, Mark. Ms. Grant, the reason I showed you those letters is not because they are by any means a complete correspondence. I'm sure there's lots of stuff missing from events around this time. But I wanted to understand about what of each stage of that you might have learnt about. And even if you can't be totally precise about when you learnt about it, if you might give us a feel for what part of a year or even a year we're talking about. So we start with Mr. Parry's email. So that's the 26th of May, 2016, and that's bundle 20 at page 1495. Now we know, obviously it went to Mr. Louden, Dr. Inkster, Anne Harkness and Mr. Walsh, but we know from Dr. Armstrong that she was aware of this. And it contains within it the facts of what the derogation was, and attached to it, albeit I haven't shown it to you, the document from ZBP, who were the multiplex M&E engineers who came up with the idea. Now, what I wanted to understand from you is, when do you think you understood the nature of this particular quite widespread derogation?
I think it was as part of the autumn 2017 discussion, although I'm not sure it was entirely as detailed as this is.
Right. The ward ventilation design strategy is a ZBP document. And the extract for the M&E clarification log, which you've already mentioned in discussion, would any of these have ever been shown to you whilst you remained as Chief Executive?
No.
Even during the work that Professor Steele was doing in 2019?
I think I saw them as part of, I mean, they've never been sent to me to say, could you give us a view on this or do this, that, and the other. I think as part of the process, I have certainly seen them, but only the design, the ward ventilation design strategy, I've not seen until recent times. And the M&E clarification log, I have seen as part of the discussions, both with the police and with yourselves, but I wouldn't have seen that, I don't.
No, the reason I'm asking, I'm just trying to sort of, I appreciate there's a number of layers between Mr. Parry and you, and this is a year before you arrive as well. So,
yes.
But I think what you're saying is that the nature of the derogation, if that's the right word, to some degree comes up in the autumn discussions. But the documents that underlie this probably don't. Would be that broadly right? I'm
not even sure just in terms of the nature of the derogation, I'm not even sure that there was a process. I mean, at a high level, yes.
At a high level, no.
Yes.
And I'm going to show you the SBAR and the 27-point action plan, and that contains details. So maybe I won't press it at this stage. Let's look at the bundle 12 documents. We'll start with Mr. Loudon's email from June 2016, which is page 813. Sorry, 816, sorry. So this is Mr. Louden to effectively the members of the project team. And he's attaching an S-Inkster about the 3-air change issue with the request that he wanted, Mr. Calder wanted to establish why there was a ventilation variation. So what I'm wondering here is, did Mr. Louden, while he was in post as Director of Facilities and Capital Planning, ever tell you about either, in broad terms, this ventilation derogation, or whatever investigation he may have carried out after this email was sent?
So my recollection is that as part of that SBAR process, I asked him, I had a conversation with him to say, how did this happen? What's the issues? And we had great difficulty in, I had great difficulty in establishing, show me the paperwork and so on. And I asked him what the issues were. And he had indicated that it had been done, the decision had been made a long time ago. I think 2009, something like that, but I can't be 100% certain of that, and that it had been very difficult to find paperwork as to who had agreed what when. But that was the only conversation about that. But it was around that time in the autumn of 2017, or at the end of, it might have been after that actually, maybe it was sometime in 2017, at the end of the year. I can't remember exactly what.
In this letter, on the third paragraph, there's a reference to chilled beams. Now, it's in the context of a particular email, which we might come back to, but the reason I'm just putting on there, when's the first time you hear the phrase of discussion of chilled beams in the context of Queen Elizabeth?
There was a reference, I think, in the SBAR to cooling beams or something. I forgot.
But it might be around about then.
Yes,
Right.
It certainly wasn't before that.
Okay. And if we then look at Mr. Seabourne's email, which may or may not be a reply to this, it's slightly unclear. If we go to page 813, now it's fair to say that Mr. Louden claims he never saw it, but it is recorded as being sent to him.
Mr. Louden says he never saw this email.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Though, to be fair, I think it's worth saying on the record that Mr. Loudon's draft statement is only a draft statement. He's not able to help us, and therefore there's no finalised statement, and we produced it acknowledging that it is a draft that he produced at one point to us, and he, of course, hasn't seen documents produced since then, and he hasn't seen the evidence, that hasn't had a chance to respond to the evidence due to his health reasons. But this is quite a nuanced explanation by Mr. Seabourne of how it came to be. And I'm wondering if you could if we look at this at a very high level, it's an explanation of why this happened. Now, it may or may not be right, but it's an explanation. Were you ever aware of Mr. Seabourne producing this explanation before we get to the Press Steele's arrival?
No.
No. Did Mr. Louden tell you about Mr. Seabourne's explanation when you spoke to him?
No.
Now, do you see at the second paragraph from the bottom, there's a reference to the temperature?
Yes. And
it says that one of the key issues faced at the outset of the project was the facility specified the building could not rise to temperatures above 26 degrees in the summer months, not usual, and this has been problematic with previous new buildings, such as ambulatory care hospitals. And he explains this drives the change in ventilation design. When was the first time it was put to you that this issue of 26 degrees, the ambulatory care hospitals, might be an issue behind this change?
Not until recent times.
Not until recent times.
So it wasn't, I mean, as part of the investigations and stuff.
I understand. If we go to the next page, there's a discussion, there's a paragraph here where he reports, we had a discussion during design process about natural ventilation, which is acceptable in the guidance, but we asked infection control for their view and approval through ANET, and they advised against it. And I think incorrect to say the infection control person who gave the advice was Penelope Redding. Now, it's fair to say that neither Annette Rankin or Penelope Redding agree with this characterisation of what they did, but they were involved to some degree. When, if ever, did you become aware that there had been some infection control input into the design of the hospital?
No, my recollection actually is that there was infection control. There was a nurse.
I realise there was a nurse in the form of Jackie Barnroy, but when did you first learn that there'd been any IPC input? Perhaps by use of names like Dr. Redding or Miss Rankin.
I couldn't tell you who they were, but my recollection is that there was certainly a nurse, an infection control nurse, as part of that. I think there was a doctor as well, but I don't remember if it was Penelope Redding. I really don't remember. But my understanding is that there was an infection control input.
It does occur to me that in a moment we'll discuss your communications with Dr. Redding in the spring of 2017.
Yep.
It occurs to me that if you'd known she was part of the design team in April 17, you might have told her.
Mm-hmm.
So can we infer that you probably didn't know in April 17 that she had some involvement?
No, I didn't know that.
Right. Okay.
I didn't. And I still don't, actually, I don't really
Right.
know that.
I mean, I think it's quite complex evidentially, but what I want to now is step back from these documents, and so put them to one side, take them off the screen, and just think about the extent of the impact, or not the impact, the effect. What parts of the hospital are affected by this decision that's recorded in Mr. Powery's email? The decision to have 40 litres a second rather than 6 air changes an hour. And there's been quite a lot of discussion amongst witnesses about which parts of the hospital it applies to. And I wondered, thinking about your knowledge in 17, maybe 18, not what you've learnt as part of the investigation, when you discovered about this air change issue, to which part of the hospital did you think it applied?
The 6 to the 3?
Yeah.
Or the whole thing?
The 6 to 3. Where was that impacting, if we think about your knowledge in 17 or 18?
I think the general ward, but I know no more than that. I think.
Would you have known, for example, that it affected rooms within 2A?
I wasn't involved in that level of discussion.
No. Would you have known that it affected PICU in the first floor critical care in a children's hospital?
So my expectation was at that point that there was the general ward and then there was the additional requirement for those areas. Yeah, so I knew that it was part of the overall picture. But my knowledge of how ventilation works and what's additional to what is quite small, to be honest. So I wouldn't have known. So I didn't think, I knew there was ventilation issues across the piece.
Okay, so before we go on to the next question, you mentioned you had a various in-tray of issues at the Queen Elizabeth. Apart from ventilation, which we just discussed, were there any other issues around the Queen Elizabeth that were on your in-tray, as it were, when you arrived?
So the issues around, bear in mind the board the issues were, when I arrived, were around just rebuilding the corporate management team, which had been a bit challenging over the last few months. Was around our financial position was really quite dire, and there was a range of other issues about what the structure and processes were, but I don't remember the ins and outs. There would have been a lot.
But they weren't related to the building itself, the physical building?
No,
right,
no.
Okay. So what I want to do is to take you to page 37 of the statement bundle, which actually is your answer to question 20A. Now, we asked you a question which, to be fair to say, I'm not sure we phrased it very well given what you knew, but we said once you became aware of what the inquiry team has called the agreed temperature derogation, perhaps after Mr. Parry's email, 26 May 16, what steps are you aware of that the board took at any time before the appointment of Professor Steele to understand why that derogation was agreed to, and whether it was carried out or under delegated authority or the approval of then Chief Executive or any subcommittee of the board? So focusing on, we wanted to know, in part, what steps the board took to find out why it was agreed to. And your answer is, during my time as Chief Executive, efforts were made to establish how the decision was made, although a review of the appropriate paperwork, through a review of the appropriate paperwork, but NHS GDC had difficulty in clarifying precisely how and where the decision was made, as it was not immediately evident from the papers that were reviewed. Now, when were the first steps taken, when you were Chief Executive, to investigate why the agreed ventilation derogation was agreed to?
I don't think I can say any more than I've already said, in the sense of, at one level, when in 2017, what we were trying to do was address the issues that the microbiologist infection control team had raised. And as part of that, I asked David Louden how that came about. And I think, without meaning to be in the slightest bit discourteous, I've answered that as best I can. But the emphasis was about, okay, what do we need to do to fix this or to address the areas of concern, as opposed to, because I remember having a conversation with him about, and I also had it with Tom Steele when he came, is to say, can we not just turn up the dial kind of behaviour, which clearly not appropriate, but I didn't
No,
understand.
it's a
that
good
at the time.
question. I mean, we asked it too, but yes, you asked that.
So I had asked them those kind of questions, but in terms of, we did try to establish who had made the decision exactly when and where was it documented, and it was very difficult to find that decision.
But this is the crucial question. When was that investigation carried out?
So I'm not sure if there was an investigation in 2017 in the sense of what you're saying. I asked David Louden how it came about, and he said it had been very difficult to find that, but I didn't ask him to do a further investigation.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously Professor Steele did. I mean, he's given clear evidence, which from my recollection is that he arrives in post very rapidly. He instructs a company called ACOM to do a review, and that report eventually feeds into various
Yes.
steps that the board takes
Yes,
in terms of
that's correct.
litigation. So there is a model for what could have been done
Yes.
in 17 in what was done in 1819 by Professor Steele. And one of the disadvantages he explained to us when he gave evidence is that when they did it in 19, Mr. Louden, Mr. Seabourn, and others were no longer available to them because they'd left and retired. When you spoke to Mr. Louden at the end of 17, and we don't quite know when, but at some point in 17, he was in post.
Yes.
And Mr. Seabourn had retired, but he had engaged with the board the year before. Other members of the team were in post. Curry and Brown were replying to emails. Not that they stopped, but they were there. Would it not have been better to carry out the investigation earlier in 2017 and find out from the people who were there what had gone wrong? Maybe more information would have been recovered.
So I think the conversation was around, because it was multifaceted, that conversation around 2017 in terms of all the issues that have been raised in the SBAR, and quite a lot of them had been raised previously, and I understand that. But the issue was really around what areas do we still have to fix, rather than because it was portrayed to me that the decision had been made a long time ago, and the efforts had already been made to understand how, who, and what, and where, and that hadn't proven to be fruitful. And so my approach to that was, well, today we need to move forward and try and look at how some of those issues were.
Did you know from any source other than Dr. Redding and her fellow, what eventually became described as whistleblowers, what the problems were in the ventilation system in the autumn of 2017? Did you have any other source of the detail?
I don't recall.
No, because we'll look at their responses, but would it be fair to say that there's a level of uncertainty in the autumn of 17 about which parts of the hospital are affected and how they are affected?
By me or by the organisation?
For the organisation as a whole.
I think that certainly there was uncertainty for me.
I understand that.
I couldn't really answer for who knew what at a lower level. I'm not certain of that. But I think there was a much greater understanding at different levels in the organisation of what had occurred from people like Mr. Powry and so on.
Because you described the hospital as world class. I think it was your words a few minutes ago. It might have been well beating, I have to say. I didn't exactly write it down at the moment. But do you accept that you might have described it as that earlier this morning?
I don't know if I did or not. But
how would you accept the hospital was a big, exciting new hospital that you weren't expecting problems with?
Yes.
You arrived, and not immediately, but by the autumn, you discovered there were problems that you weren't expecting or anticipating.
Yes.
What I don't understand is why you wouldn't want to get to the bottom of why it happened, what the implications are, and what it would cost to fix, and whether it's possible to fix it in 2017.
So there were a lot of issues raised by in that SBAR in 2017. All sorts of different things, from significant to less so.
Yes.
And as part of that, as I've said, was more about, well, what are the really critical issues that we need to fix and move forward? Because at that time, we weren't clear on exactly who had done what when, but it was emerging about, you know, what the issues were, as opposed to on a particular day, suddenly there were a lot of issues. So there was more an emphasis on moving forward than doing a...
Yeah, because I suppose there's a few options that you could have been faced with had you investigated. And they might have been different for different parts of the hospital. You might have found that for some parts of the hospital, the project team had agreed what was fitted. And then, in a sense, the health board will be stuck with that. Now, that's one of the things you might have found. Do you accept that?
Yes.
Another thing you might have found is that the health board thought it was getting something better and it didn't get it, and therefore there might have been a reason to seek to recover funds from the contractor. That might have been an option as well.
When we describe it now, yes, but
Yes.
At that time it was a much different kind of discussion.
Yes, but what I'm trying to understand is, in 2019, 2020, the health board did a significant investigation and as a result decided for some of these issues to seek to recover its losses from the contractors. And in other issues not to. And I'm not getting into which bits are which. What I'm trying to say is, would there not have been an advantage of doing that work in 17 for clarity and for ensuring that you understood the nature of the problem properly?
So I don't think... So now, then we understand a different situation than we understand in 2017. It was not as clear as it is now that there had been a number of things. It was an emerging situation, to me certainly, about how those issues were coming to the fore. So it wasn't a case of there's 10 issues and suddenly they're all... it wasn't like that.
So let's look at the conversation with the project director, just so we're connecting up to the correspondence. If we go on to the next page of your statement, page 38, you're answering question 20B, which is, if we go back one page, what steps did you take before the end of 2017 as chief executive to investigate? And so that, with that in context, go over the page until 38. You've said, my understanding following conversation with the project director, which would have been during 17, and you're saying now the end of the year, following the production of the SBAR and subsequent action plan, is decisions relating to the ventilation system taking place many years before. I was also subsequently informed that technical experts from Forward GGC had advised GGC on this issue. It proved extremely challenging to try and establish precisely when and who made that decision, even after 2017. Now, when did you learn about the technical expert's involvement? Was that in the conversation with Mr. Louden in 17 or later?
No, I think it was in that conversation with Mr. Louden.
Right. So
it might have been on that exact date, but it was in that time frame.
did you think of did you tell the chair about this conversation?
I can't remember.
Did you tell the Scottish Government about this conversation?
See, it wasn't, so now those issues are quite, are to the fore. At that time, it was much more about, there are a number of issues with the new hospital and we need to deal with them. And that's what we were trying to do. So it wasn't that someone was saying there is a massive issue here that we need to resolve. It wasn't like that. It was a matter of, there are some parts of the new hospital, including the ventilation, that need to be addressed. But it wasn't exclusively that. There was a range of issues. So it wasn't a case of somebody coming into my room and saying, there are massive, massive issues here that we need to fix right this minute. Bearing in mind the hospital had been open for 2.5 years at that point. So one would assume that if there had been serious, really big, significant patient safety issues, that they would have been dealt with long since. So I'm not saying there wasn't any issues, but the way you're saying that is not quite how it happened.
I understand that. And I suppose I could only do is draw a contrast. And I do understand there may be an answer to this. In some point, at this process, when we come to the S-bar in a moment, you learn various things and you speak to Mr. Louden, as described here.
Yes.
And we're taking that towards the end of 17. In the summer of 18, the following year, Professor Steele turns up with the DMA Canyon L8 risk assessments.
Yes.
Now, on that occasion, you act rapidly. You cause investigations to take place, you're responsive, and you ask questions. On this occasion, I'm putting to you that you don't act with that level of responsiveness, questions, challenge, and seeking information. What's the reason for the difference?
So the S-bar, which generated some of this conversation, had a number of things in it. So it wasn't. So in terms of the water reports, there was clearly within that issues that the board had not dealt with fully, shall we put it like that. Whereas over here, it was a much more general debate about how do we move forward. But in terms of the moving forward, so we didn't have a report. So the DMA reports were handed to me, as I've described in my statement. Yeah. And at that point, we were already in the middle of having some issues with the water at that time, which were perceived to be part of the water. And so therefore, when you get a report, when you're in a process of having some discussion about the water, which says you haven't done all these things, then absolutely clearly, gosh, we need to deal with that right now. Whereas over here, it was a much more slow burn kind of situation where, the microbiologists were raising some issues and we were trying to deal with them, but it was actually to be specific about how where within those things in the S-bar are the really critical issues. So they are quite different, the way they came to the fore.
I understand that, but I suppose the response would be the S-bar and the ventilation issues within it arrive more than 2 years after the BMT unit has come and gone, yes, which is quite a big event. And after, initially anyway, it's been found there's problems with the ventilation in the Shahalian unit. So how do you respond to the suggestion that, whilst perhaps not at the same level of urgency in terms of public attention, patient concern, as in 18, that the ventilation issues, when they do emerge, they don't just come out of nowhere. There have been these previous issues around key national services and their ventilation systems, which you should know about, and therefore the health board should have reacted to carry out an investigation in 17.
But we were trying to move forward in a positive kind of way and make as many changes and alterations to the ventilation system as we could. So it wasn't that we're sitting saying nothing to see here. It was actually, the dialogue was ongoing in that 2017. And I think probably before that as well, I just can't remember exactly. But basically we weren't sitting doing nothing. But the question you've asked me is, what was the investigation? It's more about, we were trying to move forward, and I totally understand what you're asking me, but it's not, our emphasis was on trying to resolve the issues that had been highlighted.
And how would you respond to the suggestion that had a bigger, proper investigation, rather like the one that happened in 19, being carried out into the ventilation system systematically across the whole hospital in 17, you might actually have found out about the water stuff earlier as well, because you might have actually got into how the whole building was being run. How do you respond to that suggestion? If you'd investigated the ventilation earlier, might you have picked up the water issue earlier?
I couldn't really answer that. I mean, it's difficult to say.
Now, let's look at when you might have learnt about the issue of the ventilation. Now, if we go to question, well, before we go to the question is, you seem to be suggesting that you became aware of the issue around the ventilation through the S-bar and the action plan. Is that, should I be hearing that correctly? It's through those events that you learn about this stuff?
Generally.
Generally.
I mean,
And
it's quite a long time ago and it's quite hard to remember exactly who said what to who when.
No, I understand that. Well, we have some text which we're going to come to later between you and Dr. Redding. This is Bundle 14, Volume 1, Document 61, and I think it's page 663. Oh, that's definitely wrong. Let's try again. 14, Volume 1. (633). Sorry, my mistake. Yeah. So we're going to come to the earlier exchanges in April with Dr. Redding, but the bottom, if we go to the next page, this is April, we go to the next page, and we see the top of the page, we have a message on the left, which Dr. Redding explained comes from you, on 28th of April, in grey, ends OK Jane. Then we have a reply from Penelope Redding. And then after the note, 27th of April 2017, you say, I feel I need to let you know, she says rather, I feel I need to let you know that I've had to contact Jennifer Armstrong and David Stewart to alert them my concerns related to infection control over the page. And that's quite a long email. She says she's going to go to stage 2 of the whistleblowing policy if a meeting isn't arranged. Keep going. And then you reply, this is page on the 27th of April, September rather. Thank you for your text. Jennifer had already updated me on the emerging issues, and I know she plans to be in touch with you to arrange a meeting. I've asked her to keep me updated on progress to ensure the issues are addressed. Do you think it could be that Dr. Armstrong would have told you about issues such as the ventilation in that conversation or exchange in September that you're referring to there? Or would it have had to wait till the actual meeting took place?
In September 17th?
Yeah.
Yes. I can't actually see on the screen that text, the second text.
So if you zoom into the middle of the page.
Oh yeah, sorry.
So 27th September 17, 8 to 27 in the evening, and you're acknowledging that you've spoken to Dr. Armstrong. One gets the impression from the exchange on that day, the 27th September. And I'm wondering whether it would have been before the SBAR meeting, which is the 4th of October, that you learnt about the ventilation issues? Or did you have to wait to get a report back from the SBAR meeting?
I really can't.
You can't help.
I'm sorry. I just really can't remember that.
But if we take that off the screen, would you accept that the reason you learn as chief executive that the ventilation systems of the hospital are not as guidance would suggest is because Dr. Redding and her colleagues raise an SBAR which starts a process which results in you learning that?
From my personal perspective, yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
However, others were already dealing with issues and knew about them.
Yes. But they hadn't told you.
I have no recollection of them telling me.
Right. Now, what I want to do is pick up on issues to do with HI scribes. What sort of knowledge would you have had in 2017 about the HI scribe process?
I know it exists and I know that it's to be done, but other than that, not.
Are you aware there's a 4-stage process that's used in the procurement of new or rebuilt healthcare facilities?
I'm aware of the generally, but that's not something I've ever dealt with, actually.
Because the evidence we've had is that in NHS Greater Glasgow, the HI scribe process administratively is generally led by the project team or the estates team who are managing that facility, and then is signed off by infection control nurses and or doctors. So when you learnt that there were problems with the building, would you have not wanted to look at the HI scribes that had been done at the time?
I wouldn't have done that as a chief executive, no.
No.
I would have expected the teams to do that. I would not have
So
done
what
that.
system as chief executive exists to assure you that processes like HI scribe have been carried out at lower levels in the organisation?
I think I need to go back to my statement already. I mean, the organisation is absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And there are HI scribes going on all the time. And I wouldn't expect to see them, I never have, when I was a chief operating officer, I never saw it. And there is a process there. I have professional team, or had a professional team, to look at these things, and they would have done that. But there was no report to me about HI scribes getting done. I've never known that in any board.
Because during one of the meetings for the procurement authority, we have a note of Mr. Calderwood inquiring whether there'd been a HI scribe. I think he might have said stage 3. I can't at this point recollect, but he certainly inquires whether there was an HI scribe. And I just wonder, at the stage you learn, albeit in the context of all these other issues, as you've explained, might not asking to see the HI scribes help you work out quickly whether this problem had been properly managed before?
I didn't do that. No.
Now, on page 39, in answer to question 24, we asked you if there had been risk assessments, whether in compliance with the standards of HI scribe or otherwise, carried out in respect of the change in ventilation strategy that follows the ZBP strategy paper. And you said, don't have any knowledge of the issue, nor do I have technical expertise to provide an informed view. And I do appreciate that you don't have the technical expertise, but would management of risk be something that falls on to the chief executive's responsibility?
Yeah, but I'll go back to the, at no point in any of my chief exec posts have I dealt with those kind of HI scribes. I would expect the local team, the estates and facilities guys, and the infection control team to deal with that.
There are 1,300 rooms in this hospital that are not in specialist isolation rooms. And all of them have an air change rate that's below the Scottish Government recommendation. And I just do wonder, given the size and complexity of the hospital, and it's important to the health board, when you think, are you saying that should never really cross your agenda unless someone brings it to you? You shouldn't go and ask questions once you find out there's a problem.
I don't think that's what I said.
No, but if I put to you that, well, you said to me that you didn't carry out an investigation because at the time it was in the context of everything else. And
what I said was that we were more focused on moving forward and trying to resolve the issues.
How can you move forward without knowing where you come from?
I think, without meaning to be discourteous in the slightest bit, you asked me about why we didn't go back and investigate who decided what when. Yeah? And I've said that we tried to move forward in a positive way to say, okay, where are the key priority areas? Where are the issues that have been emerging? Because they were emerging. And the issues about ventilation are now much, much more pertinent or much more visible than they were back then. There were some issues, but they were principally around the specialist ventilation rather than around the general air changes.
So I'll ask a question in a different way then. In order to understand how to move forward and what issues you've got, do you not need to look at what the drawing said, what the contract said, what the original requirements were, in order to understand what actually has been built?
And some of the work that was done in that, even before that autumn, my understanding is that those issues were around where do we, if there are issues about the ventilation, particularly around the specialist ventilation, where are they? And also, as you pointed out before, some of them were around, has the requirement changed? You know, has the expectation changed? Or was there an issue where we thought we were getting X and we got Y? And what was the issue? So those dialogues were going on a subject by subject basis to say, if you need X in this environment, then we need the right people to have the conversation about that. And they would have been doing all that work.
Okay. What I'm going to do is jump ahead to a little bit more about ventilation that for some reason we put in a different part of the questionnaire. So if we can go forward to question page 72, which is question 59. And we've already covered some of this ground. we again ask you when you're first aware of the issue, and you give an answer, which is, broadly speaking, as you just said. But if you see the second paragraph, I was also informed.
Yes.
Now, so what was it that you were informed in September 2018?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you say here, in September 2018, I was forwarded an email exchange between Dr. Peter Hoffman of Public Health England and Dr. Inkster. Now, let us go and look at that email. So that's bundle 14, volume 2, document 31. I think it starts at page 140. Now, just so we can go back to the start of the conversation, it goes to 147. And that, well, 146, 145, 144. The email starts 15 September at the bottom of that page from Dr. Inkster over the page. And she has a question for him. Okay? We go back to 140. Were you shown the whole conversation in September 18?
I'm not certain, to be honest. I'm not certain. I certainly saw that top part, the whole of the top part.
Yes.
Whether I saw those pages you've put up now, the 8, I don't recall.
I wonder.
And that's what I mean in my statement when I say I saw the whole email. I thought that question meant, did you see the whole of that first email?
Yeah.
As opposed to the whole.
Because it could be, and I think it might be the view of Dr. Inkster, that this is a result of a question by her about HEPA filtration and air changes. And Mr. Hoffman expresses the bit you've quoted in the context of HEPA filtration. So do you see on the third line, it says, for their rooms, all air to them needs to pass through a HEPA filter. The rooms should be at positive pressure, so all gaps leak outward, preventing the inward ingress of ultrafiltered air. Positive pressure, that HEPA filtration is just expensive when channeling spores from outside inside. The air change rate is irrelevant. And then he goes on to say what you say. Now, I just wondered what technical advice you'd have about whether Mr. Hoffman is talking about general wards without HEPA filtration or specialist ventilation spaces.
The only point I was trying to make in my statement was around the fact that my understanding of that email was that there were different views about what was required where. So I'm not trying to make any technical view of, but this whole, the whole range of issues that have been identified at the Queen Elizabeth, then it has been extraordinarily difficult to find a way to get through all these issues because there are different views, different clinical views, different views from the estates guys, and different views from. So what I was trying to say there was there appear to be different views. I mean, even today there are still different views. I mean, that's why we're sitting here in a public inquiry, years later, and there has been a lot of dialogue, and there are completely different views on a lot of things.
So how do you respond to the suggestion that you're taking that out of context?
Certainly wasn't deliberately doing that.
Okay.
There was absolutely no intention to do that, and I want to make that clear. If that's the insinuation, then I was definitely not trying to do that.
But as a sort of higher level question, when did you, as chief executive, get access to technical advice on the ventilation question in the general ward? When was the first time GDC instructed someone to investigate whether it was a problem that you had 3 air changes rather than 6?
I can't answer that.
So, I mean, one of the things it seems to be is that in 17, there's no external report produced.
But there was work ongoing to try and address the issues that had been raised.
Yes, but no external. There's discussion of it in various meetings around the SBAR, but there's no report produced. In 18, there is a report produced for 2A by Innovative Design Solutions,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert, but there's no report on the general wards. There's obviously been people working on 4B because that work was done, so the patients returned in 18 in the summer. But GDC, as far as we can see, not until Dr. Agrawal is instructed in 2019, does GDC obtain any external expert advice on the general ward ventilation. I just wonder why that was.
But that would have been something that was dealt with by the Estates and Facilities Department. And so if they felt they needed that to make their way forward, they would have had the authority and the wherewithal to do that. That would have been done by them rather than by the chief executive.
But wouldn't you have wanted to know whether this really was a problem? Because as you say, there is a debate about whether 3 air changes in a general ward with robust patients matters. So would it not have helped to obtain some advice externally from the board early about whether this was a real problem or not? I just wonder why you didn't think you should press for that.
But as a part of the discussion at the end of 2017, then what we were trying to do was prioritise the areas. I've said this a lot, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. We were trying to prioritise those areas where people felt there was significant issues or issues that need to be dealt with, and we were trying to move forward rather than doing what you've described.
I've forgotten to mention Mr. Leaper's work in 2019, yeah. So that was a source of independent advice in 90. Yes. And I think I've already asked you why you didn't report this to the Scottish Government. You've already explained that, so I'm not going to go back over that. But Ms. Freeman has said in her statement that she's unsure of whether she was ever told by the Health Board that these general rooms were non-compliant with SHTMs. She had to learn about it by other routes, and I wondered if you'd accept that might be the case.
So the normal route for those things, so there was input from HPS, from HFS, and so on, and the normal routes for those kind of and also from the normal routes would have been through those. So it isn't all that normal for the board to go straight to the Cabinet Secretary. I mean, we're in a different position now because of all the issues that have happened. But if there were emerging issues, then that would have gone through HPS, HFS, and so on, and they would have then taken them up through that route. And generally, infection control issues and so on would go through HPS at that point through to the Scottish.
So HFS and HPS weren't brought in on the general wards, were they, in 17 or 18?
They were part of the overall discussions, though, so it didn't happen the way you're portraying it, though.
Right.
And I'm sorry to be.
So it's this point about it being part of a larger pot of issues that you're trying to move forward on, that you want to return to, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't sit and say, right, the general, how we deal with that. We did talk about what are the priorities and where are the areas, because it was principally around the issues that people were concerned about and were raising at that point were around, is the specialist ventilation areas, do they need to be altered?
I suppose the reason that I'm asking all these questions is because of these different events as they occurred in Edinburgh. Now, except in Edinburgh, they occurred after the water incident in Glasgow.
In Edinburgh, the new hospital?
Yeah. But I think if I remember correctly, the medical director receives a call from the Director of Infection Prevention Control and phones the Scottish Government almost immediately when she realises there's a problem with the ventilation in a 2-built unit. And I'm just wondering why the senior executive members of the Health Board don't do the same thing when they realise that 1,300 rooms are not built in accordance with Scottish Government guidance.
But it's a different scenario, because they were opening this hospital. We had already been running for 3 years by that time. And so I think...
Does that make it better?
No, it doesn't make it better, but it's a different scenario. Right. That's all I'm saying. It's not a case of... So if you go back to your comparison with the DMA yes. Reports came into my room. I had not seen them before. Gosh, we've already got some issues with the water, or we thought we had.
Yeah.
We better make sure that all these things in the DMA reports are done. That is quite a different thing from an emerging position. And it was emerging over 2017-18 that some of those issues were not to the satisfaction of individuals.
Okay. Right, I think probably what it's better to do now before we get to lunch is start on the whistleblowing process itself. We've talked about it a lot. I wonder if we can go to question 27 in your statement, which is on page 40. It's worth saying that we have read your statement, and the fact that I'm not going over individual questions doesn't mean I'm ignoring them. So we explain in 27 that you were contacted by Dr. Redding, and we ask you what you recall about that in April 17, and you described that in April 17, shortly after you'd taken up post as the chief executive, Dr. Redding called me one evening. She stated she wished to have an off-the-record conversation about a range of issues, and I recall that she indicated that at the Easter weekend there had been a lot of work for the ICD and she'd gone into the hospital to assist. She also stated that relationships within the infection control team were not optimal. There had been a number of issues, including estates facilities associated with the new hospital, and you say, due to the passage of time, I do not have a recollection of the conversation. Now, I don't think Dr. Redding has a complete recollection of the conversation either. So just trying to work out what you might have been told. You've obviously remembered that she was told something about relations in the infection control team.
Yes.
Can you be a bit more specific about what the issues, including estates and facilities associated in the hospital, might have been, from your recollection?
She certainly mentioned the cleaning, because I remember that.
Right.
And it is such a long time ago.
My fault entirely. I just missed that. She certainly mentioned.
She mentioned the cleaning.
Thank you.
And she mentioned, and I really can't recall whether she mentioned there were a range of issues with the Queen Elizabeth, including cleaning. Yeah? But she didn't say, or at least I don't recall her saying, and there was this and this and this and this. I don't remember that. What she was most focused on was the fact that I think the weekend before, I've not checked this actually, I should have, but it was the Easter weekend, and I don't know if that was the weekend before, but very soon near that time, there had been a lot of work for the ICD. She talked about the fact that she'd had to come in to assist. She talked about the relationships between infection control and microbiology were not optimal, and that she talked about the doctors and the nurses weren't gelling as one team and so on. She talked about that, and she talked about, and this is becoming more difficult as there are a number of issues with the Queen Elizabeth and or something like that. But I do not recall her saying, and there's this and this and that.
I see.
She may have, but I don't.
Beyond cleaning, that's the only specific in a sense.
She said estates and facilities, including the cleaning. I vaguely remember that. And the reason I think I remember that is because I had previously had conversations with her in the past, you know, when I was the coup, about things like cleaning.
Right. Now, if we look at the bottom of it, I then spoke to the medical director as executive lead for IPC, who indicated that there were a number of issues. There were differing views within the teams of the Queen Elizabeth RHC on a number of them. She indicated over the page, the IPC was working with the infection control doctors and nurses and local clinical teams to address the concerns. And he spoke to the director of estates and facilities and chief operating officer to ensure they were aware of the issues and taking any required actions. Before we go back to Dr. Armstrong and what she told you, would I be entitled to assume from the fact that you didn't say this about the director of estates facility didn't then tell you about the ventilation problems in the hospital because your evidence, you learned about them later?
Yes.
Yes, right, okay. If we think about your conversation with Dr. Armstrong, you've been away from GGC since 2013.
Yes.
Would this have been the first time you were aware in your new role as chief executive of anything to do with relationships within the IPC team?
From my previous role or this?
No, at this point. You've just arrived. This is the first time. Right,
yes.
Okay. What detail did Dr. Armstrong give you about the relationships within the IPC team and how they had been since the hospital opened?
My recollection is that we talked about the challenges between microbiology and the demands of those jobs and the infection control sessions, if you know what I mean, in terms of that whole discussion about how that interface works. We talked about the fact that nurses were quite important to this team as well and how we would support them. And it was that kind of general discussion rather than...
Did the conversation extend to the names of individual members of the IPC team, the lead ICD, the sector ICDs, the ICNs, the nurse consultant, the manager?
I can't remember.
Sorry. Because one of the pieces of evidence that the inquiry has had, and I put these in your bundle, was that Dr. Inkster, who at this point is the lead ICD, but had been the regional sector ICD, and Dr. Peters, who was the sector ICD, had attempted to demit their role as sector ICDs in June 2015 in letters that raise both relationships issues but also safety issues. Were you aware that they had been raising safety issues as early as July 2015?
Not then, no.
No. When did you become aware that they had been raising safety issues since 2015?
Probably as part of that, as part of the whole...
Right.
I'm not certain. But even at that point, I'm not sure I was aware that... No, I probably was, that they had been raising them for some time.
The SBAR time is when you're thinking of it.
I would say roughly. I don't have a clear recollection of exactly when, but that's my understanding of it, yeah.
And in the conversation with Dr. Armstrong in April 17, would she have told you about issues around the ventilation and the ICD's concerns about it?
I don't recall having that conversation.
I mean, given what your position is about when you learnt about it, would you accept it seems unlikely that she would have told you?
Yes.
Yeah. You discuss that in slightly more detail on page 41 at the bottom of the page. And then over on page 42, I think we've covered this now in some detail. Second paragraph. I wonder if we can explore your reference in the third line to not regarding the conversation with Dr. Redding as bypassing existing governance structures. I wonder what you mean by that.
So I think your question somewhere in here was around...
Yeah, it's over the page and it's probably Roman numeral 5. Or it might be 2.
Yes, I think it's 3 actually. Did you accept there were problems with this?
Yes.
Given it's right. So I took that to mean that interaction with Dr. Redding. To me, that's why I'm replying in that way. So the question I thought was, did you accept there were problems with the governance in that Dr. Redding had to phone you? Right?
Yes, and that's probably what you meant.
Beg pardon?
That's probably what we meant.
Well, and my answer to that was, no, I didn't think that, because I knew Dr. Redding from my previous life. I'd had some discussions with her on a number of issues when I was the coup, and so therefore I thought she was trying to alert me to some of those things, but I didn't regard it as that question asked.
Because her evidence is that the reason she phoned you is because she'd not got very far with Mr. Calderwood and Mr. Archibald and others. Dr. Stewart, I think, who she'd phoned in the earlier part of the year, and she waited until you arrived, and then, having had some relationship with you, she phoned you.
Yeah.
Now, at one level, if you're very purist about this, that is going outside the formal structures of the health board and the
Yes.
You'd accept that.
Yes.
But you think this is, you would see it as sort of broadly helpful that people phone you if they think there's something you need to know about.
Well, I thought that's why she did it.
Yeah.
I thought that she had contacted me because I knew her before and we had dealt with issues in the past, and I thought that's why she was doing it.
Right. And so you then speak to Dr. Armstrong and Mr. Louden and others and
Yep.
Mr. Archibald, and you, and we then have the stage, what becomes realised as the stage 1 whistleblower.
Uh-huh.
Now, before we get to that, let's deal with what it's called, because I think it's probably worth, as it were, dealing with this. Do you think there's some level of, is there a level of confusion about whether this is a whistleblower or not? The emails to Dr. Armstrong and then the SBAR, is that a stage 1 whistleblower, or is it not a whistleblower, or is it just it was unclear at the time? What was it?
I think it was unclear, and also certainly in the documents you sent me, Dr. Redding says that she told me there was a whistleblower. I'm afraid my recollection of that is quite different, and that she was having an off-the-record conversation with me. At one level, though, the main. So, in terms of, she did not. I do not believe that it was clear that she regarded that as a stage 1 whistleblower.
The April communication with you.
Yes, or indeed the subsequent stuff after that in the
because she maintains that the thing afterwards definitely was a whistleblower.
Yeah, what I'm saying is we didn't. Well, I certainly didn't appreciate that, and I don't think others did either.
Right. Now, could I just show you Bundle 14, Volume 1, page 635? So this is that thread that we looked at earlier. It's a little bit before you. It's the message to which you respond that you've spoken to Dr. Armstrong. And do you see how the second paragraph?
Yep.
Today I alerted them that I feel I'll need to go to stage 2 of the whistleblowing policy if a meeting is not arranged by 11th of October. Now,
Yes.
I think she might be stages out at this point because there hasn't been stage 1 at this point.
Yes.
But would you accept that she tells you on 27th of September that she is proposing to use the whistleblowing policy?
Yeah, certainly when I saw that, we then had a conversation internally to say, gosh, is this a different process or how do we deal with this in terms of moving forward? But the key was that the medical director organised a meeting quickly to try and resolve something. And whether it was called whistleblowing or not, we were trying to deal with the issues that she was raising. And that, in some ways, that's what whistleblowing is about. If people have concerns about issues, then it's to try and get the most optimal way to deal with them, as opposed to what label it has on it, if you know what I mean.
Would you accept that the policies it then stood was a little bit unclear about this first stage of the whistleblowing? Policies it then stood was a little bit unclear about how the first stage works in the whistleblowing, whether you have to call it that.
Well, there were individuals, though, that people could go to if they wanted to establish, how should I go about this? So
right.
I think there's more than one mechanism to ensure that was appropriate.
But in any event, there is an SBAR, and then there is a meeting.
Yes.
Now, would you have been briefed about the meeting of the 4th of October, soon after it happened?
Yes.
Yeah. And what I want to do is understand how it's reported into the board process. So if we take this off the screen, I think your statement refers to the Clinical Care and Governance Committee. So if we go to the minutes of the 5th December 2017 committee, so that's Bundle 27, Volume 4, Document 8 at page 90. That seems problematic. Oh, there we are. Now, obviously, you're not a member of this committee. It's a small committee. But if we go to page 93, I have to check that, sorry. 27.4. Page 93, the bottom of the page. Yes, item 56. So Dr. Armstrong turns up with Mr. Vine, Mr. Parry, and Mr. Louden. And are we to understand that it is this report that basically is the way the board would learn that this stage 1 whistleblower, this SBAR process had started? The committee was advised there had been a series of issues raised by a small number of microbiologists associated with the facilities in Queen Elizabeth and RHC and the structure of the IPC term. Is that effectively all that clinical care and government is told at this stage?
So I'm sure there would, I wasn't at the meeting, but I'm sure there would have been discussion about what those things were.
Yes, well, there will be more discussion, but this is reported through to the board. I'm wondering, given the board structure that you report the minutes through to the board, but not necessarily the papers, the board itself is only going to see what's in this minute.
So the board, though, the way it operates is that the chair of the committees, if they have things they want to raise with the board, and you'll see in the board minutes now that they have a slot, shall we call it, to say, and I want to bring to the board, to the attention of the board, these 3 things or whatever. But I think we're looking at this through the lens of now as opposed to then, because I think it would be perfectly normal process to raise things that colleagues have raised through the clinical care governance process. That would be how it would work.
No, I understand that, but you've just explained to me that as part of this process of the SBAR, you were trying, or you actually, the people working on it, were trying to work out how to move forward to address the issues that have been raised.
Yes.
And some of those issues were that the ventilation system of the hospital, across the entire hospital, was not in compliance with guidance. Now, I accept that the context is not as, there's not that sense of urgency that might have been in place the following year with all the developments going on. But how do you accept the suggestion that this is quite a gentle way to report such a discovery to the board? Because this is how the board's going to find out about it. I mean, there's a better report in the next meeting, but this one in December doesn't really tell you there's a problem if you're a board member.
I wasn't at the meeting and I can't recall this, but I'm perfectly certain that they would have been asked, what were the issues,
Right.
and can you
So
explain
the
them?
subcommittee knew, and therefore it's up to the chair whether to put it forward.
Well, from the minute, it's hard to tell that, but one would assume that there was a range of stuff on that SBAR from, the dishwashers weren't appropriately plumbed in or commissioned or something, or they weren't cleaned, to ventilation, to there was delays in the and then there was things like in the plumbing in the institute and so on. So there was a range of things. It wasn't just, one thing.
No, I understand that, but I suppose the question, and I realise I think we're going to come around this circle a few times, so worth just finding a neat way of doing it, is that at this point, December 17, if I understand what you've said and what we found out correctly, this minute, for better or worse, is what gets to the board about the existence of all the issues in the SBAR and at this stage.
Yes, I would need to see what the papers were that went and what the presentations were to the committee as well, and I don't have that, so I don't know. But I'm perfectly certain that the committees were not. I shall put this. They weren't just a matter of people coming and saying, well, there was an issue and we're dealing with it. The non-executives rightly gave it a level of scrutiny and challenge and asked questions about, well, what does that mean? What are you doing about it? What are the issues? So there was, in all the board committees, there's quite a lot of challenge to the executive team.
So if we now look at the paper, which is more detailed, which is bundle 20, document 48 at page 793, go back one page, please. Yes. So this is the report. 792. And it explains the purpose of the report, that 3 consultant microbiologists raised a series of concerns about the facilities in the Queen Elizabeth and the RHC and the structure of the IPC service within the board. And then there's discussion of the meeting, the tabling a list of concerns, and the minutes are attached to this. Go over the page, and these are the issues listed, and the themes are identified as the PPVL rooms, the presence of filters, third bullet point in 2A, the 4B upgrade, single room specification, and then we have the actual minutes and the S-bar attached. So your view is that that's a safe way of reporting things up to the board?
I think it covers the ground of what the issues were. I'm sure there was discussion about, well, what does that mean? What are we doing about it? Certainly the majority of the committees that I've been at, those are the things that are...
But it's the committee chair who decides whether, in a sense, to flag it to the board itself.
Committee chair
with the executive lead.
Yes, yes.
And so the board itself won't see this paper, we'll just see the short minutes.
Yes, but I think somewhere in my statement I've tried to explain how that works, because the board committee, the board itself, the NHS board meeting is there's such a wide range of things in a board the size of Glasgow and Clyde,
yes,
that come to the board. So it's a bit like what the question you asked me about the corporate management team. You know, if you put everything onto there, then you know you'll be here for a long time, I think is what you said, or something.
Yes,
like that.
so you feel there has to be some form of filtering process.
I think the process works better with things going to the Clinical and Care Governance Committee, for example, because they would ask, you know, well, what's happening with these things, but they would also ask, what's the impact of those things?
Yes.
You know, has there been an impact on infection rates? Has there an impact on patient safety? Is there an impact on the outcome of some of those things? Because some of them are more substantial than others. So the committees, in my experience, generally ask, well, what's the outcome? What is the impact of those things on the clinical services? What's the impact?
Thank you. Now, what I want to do is move to page 44 of your notes, a couple of questions before the lunch break of your statement. Question 30. We ask you, to what extent is it fair to say that the 27-point action plan came about as a direct consequence of the stage 1 whistleblower raised by Dr. Redding and others, and your response is the action plan was drafted following these discussions as, although a number of issues have been previously highlighted and various actions in respect to these were already underway, this process brought increased focus to the issues with clarity of timescales for action. It ensured greater clarity on the progress that is made of a number of areas. So, I suppose, a couple of questions. Was it legitimate for Dr. Redding and her colleagues to raise these issues?
So people have the right to raise any issues they want. So you know, if people have concerns, they should raise them, and we should consider them and if necessary, deal with them.
But in this particular case, given that the response of the parts of the board, or maybe even the board itself, has not been entirely positive at all times to the raising of issues by Dr. Redding, Dr. Peters and others, at this moment, is what they're doing a legitimate thing for them to do?
I think there's a range of issues, as I've said already, on that S-bar. There's a range of issues. And I think it's quite important, and part of the issue around some of this is, if everything's important, nothing's important. You know what I mean? What are the areas that are really critical to moving forward? And I think that's one of the challenges in all this. But I think the process to try and get everything down on one bit of paper, to say, right, okay, whether they're minor or major, put them onto a bit of paper, and then we'll be able to be clear that those are the issues, because there was a bit of debate about what are the issues that are of concern. Put them onto one bit of paper with an action plan, and then we can monitor the fact that they're getting dealt with. So I don't characterise this as where they're right or where they're wrong. I think the fact of the matter is some of them had already been dealt with, is my understanding of it, but it's better to put everything down and make sure it's visible, and then people are addressing them and making sure they're done.
I realise you say that, but I think I have to press you.
Okay.
There, 3 clinicians raised these issues. It's their evidence, which I accept is not accepted by the people they're talking about, that the atmosphere in the meeting was not entirely warm and happy to see them.
In the beginning of October meeting.
Yes. Now, I absolutely have to make it clear that that is not the view of Dr. Armstrong, who chaired the meeting. There's a difference which this inquiry has to grapple with. But if we then look about what later happens when the stage 2 whistleblower, which we'll come to after lunch, I'm just keen to press you on, and if you want to use a different word, suggest it. But is it legitimate for 3 microbiologists to raise the issues as they did in the method they did it in September 2017 that they put in that October SBAR? Is that a legitimate thing for them to do as clinicians who work for NHS Greater Glasgow?
Yeah, I mean, it is right that people, if have concerns, that they put them into a process, whether it's a whistleblowing process or any other process, because every single day in Glasgow and Clyde, groups of clinical staff or non-clinical staff are putting things onto a bit of paper which they're they want dealt with, or they've got ideas. So it's just a normal part of process that people raise things and we have to deal with them. So I don't think it's not legitimate, if you know what I mean, as a sort of double negative. I think it's right that if people have concerns, we put them onto a bit of paper, we have a discussion, and we have an action plan to deal with them.
Thank you. I think this is probably a good point to break for lunch, I suspect. Well,
yes, we'll take an hour for lunch, and we'll try and be back convening at 2 o'clock. So if I can invite you to go back to the witness plots.
Please stand.